Are recording. All right. I think we have everybody back. Just one person. All right. So what do you guys think of the reading overall? Like it, dislike it? It was okay?
I liked it.
I like it. I
Yeah.
like it very much. And
I thought it
also
was
by
brilliant.
knowing, I'm sorry.
Right.
And also by knowing DuBois is the founder of an AACP and the pioneer to lead the Black rights movement in US, and also has the huge influence around the world.
Yeah.
I think he actually give introduction of how Black people can find themselves in the society and establish their identification. I think that's really important. And also this book was written at 1904, right?
Yeah, 1903 was the publication.
Yeah, so think about during that time, the whole society structure is so differently, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it was amazing.
Good point, Cecilia. Daniel, was that you? I was gonna say something.
Said that the writing was brilliant. Like
Yeah.
it was if you look at it and just analyze the structure of it, his flow, it's masterfully done.
I agree. It's one of my favorite pieces of writing, period. I'm not gonna lie to y'all though, right? Like, so the first time I read it, I didn't sit down and understand everything that he says. That's not the case. I've read this shit probably 10 times now, but when I first picked up the text, I had to put it down just because I didn't understand it. I was lost. And I think the old English way that it's written kind of makes it opaque for a little bit. But once you get beyond that, Daniel's absolutely correct. It's a masterfully written piece of literature. Like the argument is laid out exquisite. It's really good, really good writing, and it's really good example on how to argue a point. So let me provide my context. And Cecilia actually kind of touched on some of the things I was going to mention. But W.E.B. Du Bois, right? The founder of the NAACP. The Niagara movement was one of the first Pan-African movements in the United States. He was the first Black person, period, to earn a Ph.D. from Harvard, right? And when he graduated from Harvard, in his acceptance speech, he told the powers that be within Harvard that the pleasure, I assure you, was all Harvard's, right? So really, they were lucky to have me in their ranks, juxtaposed to me being lucky to be among them, right? By all intents and purposes, how many of you guys are sociology majors or minors or thinking about the field of sociology? Okay, so
I'm taking a sociology class.
Okay, so actually, W.E.B. Du Bois, although he does not get this credit, he is the founder of American sociology. So if you're from a sociology background, I got my bachelor's in sociology. You're familiar with the likes of Marx, you're familiar with the likes of Weber, and all these sociological thinkers who came out of the Frankfurt School in Germany, right? Du Bois was trained in Germany, and Marx, Weber, and a lot of these sociological forefathers were his classmates, right? So he was actually one of the foremost thinkers of sociology within the United States. And he has a book titled The Philadelphia Negro, which is one of what they would say, one would argue, the first works of sociology within the United States. And this is just Du Bois going to Philadelphia and putting together a sociological study of Blacks within the area of Philadelphia, which in turn became the Philadelphia Negro. He goes through a number of ideological positions, right? So one of the things that he starts off with is this notion of the talented 10th, right? So we're going to take the 10% of the most qualified, the most educated, the most sophisticated Black folks. We'll give them all of the resources that we can, and then they will be tasked to educating and uplifting the other 90%, right? This is one of his starting points. It's a very elitist position, right? We haven't covered Marcus Garvey yet in this class, but when we get to Marcus Garvey and Du Bois had a rift. They had kind of a beef going between the two. But what's interesting, towards Du Bois's later years, he does take up a lot of the task that Marcus Garvey was putting on the table for Black folks, right? This idea of repatriation, returning back to Africa, right? This notion of Pan-Africanism that Garvey made very popular. DuBois takes up a Pan-African ideology. In fact, DuBois in his later years, his deathbed is in Ghana, right? So he does die on the continent of Africa. And before he makes his transition, he's working on the Encyclopedia Africana. So the president of Ghana at the time, Kwame Nkrumah, gave DuBois the task of cultivating the Encyclopedia Africana, right? So he does end his life with a very much of a universal Pan-African ideal, right? So the evolution from the talented 10th, just looking at educating a small 10% of the population, to a Pan-African global identity, which is concerned with the masses of African people throughout the world, right? This is the ideological shift that you see within Du Bois. So this was first published in 1903, also to Cecilia's point. I am going to give you guys the foreword because there's some very important information in the foreword. You know, I need to start putting this in the PDF so you guys could read them too. But I'm going to read the first paragraph. You don't have access to this, but it's the first paragraph of the foreword. And this kind of situates you on how he wants this reading to be engaged, okay? Herein lie buried many things, which, if read with patience, may show the strange meaning of being Black here in the dawning of the 20th century. What becomes important, right? And peep how I'm reading this, not what's being said, but how I'm saying what I'm saying, right? Herein lie buried many things, which, if read with patience, may show the strange meaning of being Black here in the dawning of the 20th century. So the patience for me becomes key, right? He's telling you the opening line of the text, read this with patience, right? And another thing is buried. A lot of his meaning is buried, right? And I think that buried that he's talking about is the English literature that you kind of have to shift through to get the meaning to what he's saying. So he's giving you some insight on how to approach this text, which becomes very important. This meaning is not without interest to you, gentle reader. And again, gentle reader, right? Gentle, patient. This is telling you how to engage this. So be gentle with me as you read my work, right? Be patient with me as you read my work, right? For the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line. So this is, he's putting his thesis out there, right? The color line is the problem of the 20th century. I pray you then receive my little book in all charity, studying my words with me, forgiving mistakes and foible for sake of the faith and passion that is in me, and seeking the grain of truth hidden there, right? So again, forgive my mistakes. So any mistakes that I do while making this text, it's a mistake of passion, right? I'm passionate about the subject matter, right? And then, but seek out the grain of truth, right? So think about how small a grain of sand is. He's saying the truth located in this book may be as small as a grain, but seek out that truth with patience, being gentle, right? So this is what he's asking of us as we engage the text. So I'll move forward to the first page. And a couple of things. He starts off the text with these Negro spirituals, right? And I don't know how many of you guys read the Negro spiritual, but he circles back to that towards the end of the text. And he kind of alludes to these Negro spirituals throughout the essay, right? So it's something to be attentive to. I'm going to read the opening paragraph because I'm just a fan of the writing, to be honest with you. And I just love the way he presents things. So between me and the other world, so we know that there's two worlds at play, just how he opens up the text, right? The two worlds becomes important in understanding the veil. Is an ever unasked question, unasked by some through feelings of delicacy, by others through the difficulty of rightly framing the question. All, nevertheless, flutter around it. So they all dance around this question, right? They approach me in a half-hesitant sort of way, eye me curiously or compassionately, right? And then, instead of saying directly, how does it feel to be a problem? They say, I know an excellent colored man in my town. Or, I fought at Mechanicsville. And we know from the end note that Mechanicsville is a site of the Civil War battle that was fought in June of 1862 outside of Richmond, Virginia. Then, or to go back to the text, or don't these Southern outrages make your blood boil, right? So that's the equivalent of, oh, it's terrible what happened to George Floyd, right? So these are things that the other world will say to make themselves appear as if they're on the same side with you, right? So he's saying this is the unasked question that they dance around, right? This is how they go about trying to get to the question. So I'm moving now to page 8, top of page 8. He says, at these, I smile, or I am interested, or reduce the boil to a simmer. What do you think that means, to reduce the boil to a simmer? So they're asking them a question, right? Or they're trying to ask a question. They haven't really got directly to the question. And they're dancing around the question. Oh, I voted for Obama twice. I think that Black Lives Matter, right? Isn't what happened to George Floyd terrible, right? So that's the kind of, to take the way that they dance around the question into our now, right? So he says, to respond to that, I smile, or I might be interested, right? Or I reduce the boiling to a simmer. What do you think that means, to reduce the boiling to a simmer?
I think like it just like calm down a little bit, like.
Yep. Exactly, Yuki. So the questions is pissing him off, right? Like, y'all ask me some bullshit questions. So instead of being mad, I'm going to reduce my anger, right? So you think about boiling water. When a water is boiling, it's at the highest temperature of heat that it can stand, right? Hence why it's boiling. And as you turn that temperature dial down, it goes from boiling to a simmer, right? So I'm reducing the heat. I'm reducing my anger, okay? So here we go. Reducing the boil to a simmer as the occasion may acquire. So depending on how you come at me, depending on what question you ask, I might flip on your ass, I might reduce the boil to a simmer. I don't know, depending on the question, on the occasion, right? But to the real question, so this is what he's getting at. This is really his point here. To the real question, how does it feel to be a problem? So that's the question, right? That's the question that they're dancing around. They want to ask him, how does it feel to be a problem? And DuBois' response, I answer seldom a word. I don't even address that question, right? So a couple of things at play here. He's situating you in one thing, the two worlds, right? And we know that there's a veil that separates these two worlds, right? The other world is uncomfortable to pose the question what DuBois is attentive to. What they really want to know, how does it feel to be a problem, right? How does it feel to be Black in America, right? This is what they're getting at. And he says, to that, I don't even address it. I don't even answer a word. Also, in the foreword, he lays out what he'll be getting at in each chapter, okay? Again, you guys don't have access to the chapter, but he says, first, in 2 chapters, I have tried to show what emancipation meant to them and what was its aftermath, okay? So he wants to, the goal or the aim of this chapter is to show what emancipation meant for the Black folks, right? This is what he wants to get to. And so I'm going to move to page 8. And then he talks about when he first noticed he was different, right? And they're exchanging the greeting cards that they bought for 10 cents a card. And he exchanges a card with the tall blonde woman who refuses his card, right? And that gave him the insight that, okay, I'm different, right? And this is where we get the veil first introduced. This is where you first hear about the veil in the chapter. Then it dawned upon me with a certain suddenness that I was different from the others, or like mayhap in heart and life and longing, but shut out from their world by a vast veil. So there goes the veil being introduced, right? That's what's going to separate the two worlds. I had thereafter no desire to tear down that veil, to creep through. I held all beyond it in common contempt. So again, we have the two worlds. The veil separates the two worlds. DuBois is saying, I had no desire to climb underneath the veil to see what's going on in that other world, right? I held that other world in common contempt, right? In other words, fuck that other world is what he's saying, right? He says, in common contempt, I lived above it in a region of blue sky and great wandering shadows, right? So this is how he avoided the bifurcation of the two worlds. I lived above the veil in a blue sky, right? He says that that sky was bluest when I could beat my mates at examination time, or beat them at a foot race, or even beat their stringy heads. Alas, with the years, all this fine contempt began to fade. For the worlds I longed for, all their dazzling opportunities was theirs and not mine, right? So he realized between this veil that separates the two worlds, on the other side of that world, on the other side of that veil for the other worlds, there's opportunities that are there, right? That I have no access to, right? So he also tells us how he's dealing with this two worlds is he lives in the blue skies above the veil, and those skies were bluest when I'm able to show my intelligence in examination. I get better test scores than they do, right? When I'm able to show my physical superiority and I could beat them in a foot race, right? Or if it comes down to it and they tripping, I whoop their ass, right? This is what he's saying. This is how he lives and he deals with his two worlds and lives and deals with this veil, okay? So on page 9, we're introduced to double consciousness. I'll read this, the first paragraph. So the first full paragraph on page 9, starting with after the Egyptian. So after the Egyptian and Indian, the Greek and Roman, the Teuton and Mongolian. So these are different ethnic groups, right? Or racial categories: Indian, Egyptian, African, Indian from the place of India, Greeks, Romans. I don't know what the Teutons are. The Mongolians, they would classify like the Asian background, right? People. So these are different classifications by races, if you will, right? He says the Negro is a sort of seventh son, born with a veil and gifted with second sight. So pay attention to this second sight, okay? In this American world, a world which yields him no true self-consciousness, right? So within this society, Black folks aren't afforded a true self-consciousness. They're not afforded to be fully aware of themselves, okay? But you have this double vision going on. But only lets him see himself through the revelation of the other world. Okay, so this is where the two worlds, the veil and double consciousness come into, this is where they intersect, okay? So we know that the veil separates the two worlds, right? We know that in America, Black folks aren't provided self-consciousness, right? So what he says is the only thing that we're afforded is the ability to see ourselves the way that the other world sees us, right? So that's where this notion of dual consciousness comes into play, right? I'm viewing myself from the prism, from the gaze of how that other world, the white world, views me, right? So think about all the stereotypes that are purported on Blackness, right? Thugs, hoodlums, dangerous, intelligent, right? Unintelligent, right? These stereotypes. So what DuBois is saying, I'm forced to view myself through these prisms of these stereotypes, right? Because this is how the other world views me. So they're forcing me to view myself the way that they view me. This is at the core of this notion of double consciousness, right? So that's one consciousness that you have operating within you, the way that that other world sees you, right? So that's one state of consciousness. And then it's the way that you see yourself, right? So this is this dual consciousness at play. how the other world sees you on that other side of the veil, and then how you see yourself on this side of the veil. Okay, so that's where the double consciousness comes into place. I'm gonna read that one more time. A world which yields him no true self-consciousness, but only lets him see himself through the revelation of the other world. It is a particular sensation, this double consciousness, this sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others, or measuring one's soul by the tape of a world that looks on in amused contempt and pity, right? So this is what he means by the double consciousness. And then on page 9, lower in the page, on this paragraph here, that starts with this then. To me, I want to highlight this because he gets very explicit about one of the aims of this essay, right? And he tells you, this then is the end of his striving. So what is the name of this chapter? Does anybody know the name of this chapter that I had you guys read?
Souls of Black Folk.
That's the book. The book is of Souls of Black Folks. So
Oh.
on page 7 at the very top will tell you the title of the chapter.
I think it's of our spiritual striving.
Yep.
Is
Okay.
Okay.
That's it. So what does striving mean? What does that mean? Of our spiritual striving. But let's just focus on the word striving. What is strive? How would you interpret what that means?
To go for something you desire.
Yep, perfect, Fatima. Your desire, something you're desiring for, right? So this title of this chapter is called Of Our Spiritual Striving. So what our spirit is striving for, right? This is what our spirit desires. This is what he's articulating in this book, or in this chapter, excuse me. So again, to go back to towards the bottom of page 9, the paragraph that starts with this then, he's going to articulate this very clearly. This then is the end of his or her striving. To be a co-worker in the kingdom of culture, to escape both death and isolation, to husband and use his best powers and her latent genius. These powers of body and mind have in the past been strangely wasted, dispersed, or forgotten. What does that mean? So what is he saying is the spiritual strivings of the Negro, of Black folks? It's in the first two lines of that paragraph. This then is the end of his striving, to be a co-worker in the kingdom of culture, to escape both death and isolation. That's what he's striving for, right? What does it mean to be a co-worker in the kingdom of culture? So what's a co-worker? How would you classify someone who's your co-worker?
Someone you work with.
Someone you work with. So is that individual, Francisco, are they above you? Are they your superior? Are they below you?
No, they're on the exact same level.
Equal, right? So what the spiritual striving of Black folks is, according to DuBois, is to be a co-worker in the kingdom of culture, right? So to have my culture recognized just as well as Greek culture is recognized, right? To have my literature recognized just as prevalent as Greek culture and Greek writing is recognized, right? This is
So,
what,
Professor, is it just like equal? To be equal?
to have your culture recognized as equal.
Okay.
That's the key. And that's why he says this notion of the kingdom of culture, right? It's just a fancy way of saying, I just want my culture to be at value just as everyone else's culture is valued. And that's what he's saying is the striving, the spiritual strivings of Black folks within this chapter, okay? What else I got? Okay. So I'm gonna move to page 11. So in page 11, on this paragraph here, the paragraph that starts with the first decade was merely. So this, what I'm about to read, is very similar to the reading that we had last week, right? And in this section, you see DuBois pick up the same problems that Gomez dealt with last week, and how this idea of freedom was always being evaded, right? And how they would say, yeah, you're emancipated now, but they'll initiate black codes to keep you subjugated, right? So this is the same problem that DuBois is going to pick up what I'm about to read now. Okay, the first decade was merely a prolongation of the vain search for freedom, the boon that seemed ever barely to elude their grasp. He's just talking about freedom, right? They're never able to grab freedom. Like a tantalizing will-o'-the-wisp. I don't know what that means. That's that old 1900 shit. So I'm just kind of moving past that, right? That will-o'-the-wisp, maddening and misleading the headless host, the Holocaust of war, the terrors of the Ku Klux Klan, the lies of the carpetbeggars, the disorganization of industry, and the contradictory advice of friends and foes, left the bewildered serf with no new watchword beyond the old cry for freedom. As time flew, however, she began to grasp a new idea. The ideal of liberty demanded for its attainment powerful means, and these the 15th Amendment gave him. The ballot, which before she had looked upon as a visible sign of freedom, she now regarded as the chief means of gaining and perfecting the liberty. Okay, so essentially what he's saying is, right, that first decade of emancipation was just prolonged subjugation, right? They just extended this, our enslavement, right? So they always were being eluded by this notion or this idea of freedom. Then it says, from there, we have the Holocaust of war. We had the terrors of the Ku Klux Klan, right? The lies of the carpetbeggars. The carpetbeggars, and if you follow the end note to the end of the page, they say that they are derogatory term for optimistic Northerners who came to the South following the Civil War, right? So these are people from the North who came South, and they're trying to rectify the turmoil that Southern culture ensued, right? So they're saying, that's what they're saying, like they're, what they call them? The lies of the carpetbaggers, right? They're well-meaning, and they're under the impression that this racist Southern culture is eradicated, but they don't know no better. And they don't know, they're not aware of how the South is still trying to maintain the subjugation of African people, right? The disorganization of industry, yada, yada, yada. These are all the things that prolonged the attainment of freedom, right? But then there's a shift that takes place. And then Black folks are starting to say, well, maybe the ballot is the way to attain our liberty, right? And the 15th Amendment gave them access to start to cast the ballot, right? So you're seeing a progression in the way that they're seeking to deal with their grievances. I'm gonna have one more point and I'll call it a day. Actually, maybe two. Yeah, let me see. Yeah, we'll do two more. So on page 13, first full paragraph there, the paragraph starts with a people. A people thus handicapped ought, so anytime as a reader, right? As a reader, as a thinker, as an intellectual, you hear the word ought. Ought. You know that's a claim of ethics, right? This is an ethical claim. So this is how it should be done, right? So when you hear ought, think in your head, this is an ethical argument, right? A people thus handicapped ought not to be asked to race with the world, right? So he's talking about, before this, all the issues that Black folks have to deal with, right? He's talking about their economic depravity, right? Their lack of economic ability, right? So all these handicaps, okay? So he's saying people who have these many handicaps, they shouldn't be expected to have to race with the other races of the world, right? I want you guys to think about, I want to kind of shift the way you guys think about race, okay? Outside of how we understand race, specifically in the United States, right, as an ethnic identity, what else is a race? Don't think about people, think about activity. What else is a race?
To see who's the fastest.
Right, Thank you, Kevin. So it's a competition, right? It's a physical competition to see who could run the fastest, right? This is, and that, there's a reason why they chose to call ethnicity race. And it goes back to Kevin's point. It's a competition, right? It's to establish this notion of these ethnic distinctions that we falsely created that we're going to call race. There's a competition between these ethnic distinctions, right? So there's a competition between white folks and black folks. There's a competition between Asian folks and indigenous folks, right? There's a competition at play. That's why they purposely chose this word race, because it doesn't really signify the biological makeup of individuals, right? It's not even biologically accurate. This is a social construction, right? But they chose to call this social construction race to signify the competition embedded in this construct, okay? But check it out. So, and think about how DuBois uses race. Again, the writing is brilliant. Think about how he uses race in this context, okay? A people, thus handicapped, ought not to be asked to race with the world, right? So they shouldn't be asked to be in competition with the world, considering all the handicaps that they have, right? But
Sorry,
rather,
I missed that.
Siri, but rather allowed to give all its time and thought to its own social problems, right? So instead of being expected to compete with the rest of the world, we should be expected to give our time and energy and our thought to dealing with our handicaps, right? So that way we can effectively and evenly compete with the rest of the world, right? But he says, after his ethical claim, but alas, right? While the sociologists gleefully count his bastards, his prostitutes, the very soul of the toiling, sweating Black man is darkened by the shadow of a vast despair, right? So they don't want to talk about the handicaps, but they will count how many illegitimate children are produced in the Black community. They'll talk about how many Black prostitutes that there are in the community, right? They'll talk about how many people are put in jail in the Black community, but they won't deal with the social conditions that force them in that place, right? They won't deal with those handicaps. This is what DuBois is saying. So to round it out, I'm going to read this a little bit of a long paragraph, but we'll close it out with this. And this is important because it deals with the progressions and regressions of freedom as DuBois understands it. So this is on page 14, towards the middle. The training is the sentence I'm going to start off with. The trainings of the schools, I'm sorry, so I'm going to go up a little bit more towards the middle, the bright. The bright ideals of the past, physical freedom, political power, the training of brains, and the training of hands. All these in turn have waxed and waned until even the last grows dim and overcast. They are all wrong. Sorry, are they all wrong? All false? No, not that, but each alone was over simple and incomplete. The dreams of a credulous race childhood, or the fond images of the other world, which does not know and does not want to know our power. So again, we went through this idea of physical freedom, right? Getting rid of enslavement. We went through this idea of political power, casting our ballots, right? We went through this idea of training our minds, right? We went through this idea of training our hands, right? So we could labor our way out of oppression. Are they all wrong? No, right? But we cannot look at them as individual solutions, right? So to have intellectual abilities, but to be subjected into slavery is not going to give you emancipation, right? To have financial opportunities, but still think like a slave, that's not going to get you emancipation, right? You have to bring all of these things together, and you have to be able to attack emancipation from a multi-layered front, right? So how does being able to work, being able to think, being able to vote, being able to be freed from enslavement, how can you use all of these positionalities to emancipate a people, right? And what he's being attentive to is as we take 2 steps forward, they push us 3 steps back, right? So how can we get it to where we're no longer being pushed back? And that's the difference between freedom from slavery and complete emancipation, right? Because they could say you're no longer a slave, but you're going to have to work my land as an indentured servant, right? So you're not emancipated, right? So he's saying, how do we emancipate ourselves completely, right? And in this chapter, he's saying one of those ways is having our culture recognized as a co-worker, right? To where Black culture, Black song, right? This is why the song at the beginning of the chapter becomes important, right? It should be valued just as much as any other culture in this country. And he also argues towards the end, almost maybe even more so, because this is the foundation that built this country, right? You usually say the Negro spiritual is more American than country music. I'm paraphrasing now, but this is one of the arguments that he's making, because the Negro spiritual is grounded in the pain and the suffering that the Negro people who built this country had to deal with, right? So it's nothing more American than the Negro spiritual, as DuBois argues. Shit, my fault, y'all. This little lecture went hella long. But I'm gonna shut up. Let's jump into a fishbowl real quick. Is there anybody who wants to volunteer?
I want to do it.
Okay, Cecilia. Anybody else? Armini, okay, got you also. And then, where's she go? Can I get one more? If not, I'll call on somebody. Okay. Is it, yeah, forgive me if I mispronounce it. Is it Yaretsi? Bitra?
Yes, sorry. I've been having trouble.
Are you prepared to fishbowl today?
Yes, I am, yes.
Okay. And did I pronounce your name correctly? I'm sorry, did I pronounce your name correctly?
Oh, sorry. Yes, it's Yet City.
Yes, City. Okay, cool. Thank you. All right. So whoever wants to set it off, it's on you.
Start from me? Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna just read my reading notes first, and then I will provide more of my thoughts. So DuBois is the founder of NAACP and the pioneers to lead the Black rights movement in US and also have the huge influence around the world. And he advocated that African American must be given the equal opportunities to receive the basic educational, economic, and political opportunities. In this chapter, he used the I see it as the metaphor of the veil to represent the experience and view African Americans see the world, and also the potential economic, political, and the social opportunities they have, which is vastly different from the white, I think. The first time he experienced the difference is happened when he was trying to exchange the visiting card with other classmates at school, quote, and the white girl refused my card peremptorily with a glance, which, I think that is stunning. Then it dawned upon me with a certain suddenness that I was different from the others, in heart and life and longing, but shut out from their world by a vast veil. So this is where he introduced the veil. I had thereafter no desire to tear down that veil. I held all beyond it in common contempt and live above it in the region of blue sky and great wandering shadows. I think this is the, how, I think that this is the first time he introduced the, the idea of the veil to describe the separate, what is separate the white and the Black people, and they live in a totally different world with different opportunities and resources. Yeah. And also he used the term double consciousness to express the idea that Black people must have 2 fields of vision. They must be conscious of how they view themselves And at the same time, they have to be conscious of how the other people view them. So, quote, they are given this double consciousness to always look at themselves through the eyes of others. One ever feels his two-ness, America and the Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled thrivings, two warring ideal in one dark body, who dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder. I think those are very important terms that describe how Black people needs to establish their own spirits to, realize that their identity and to find a way out to, build up to, I think to realize their difference and their culture and build up their self-confidence. I think he introduced the way that Black people can find, I think the way out, to live in the society, and at the time, centuries ago, which they are considered be different from the white, So I think that is stunning. What else I want to say? I like the way, well, because I think that the importance he think education and the political rights are important for Black people, because he realized that there has to be educated Blacks to realize what's a problem and how, and to give the solution to the rest of the 90% of the Black people who are not well educated, because that's the first step for for people that's just the first step. And second, I think he advocated the political rights, which is the voting rights, is so important, because he realized the society is structured in favor of the white, not the Black. So they need to get more votes to rebuild the construction, the infrastructure of the society and the Constitution. And that's my thoughts.
Thank you, Cecilia. I have a lot of points I want to rip off of what you mentioned, but for the sake of time, I'm going to put myself on pause.
Okay.
Whoever's next.
I'll go next.
Okay.
I just wanted to mention something that stood out to me. On page 9, it says he simply wishes to make it possible for a man to be both a Negro and an American without being cursed and spit upon by his fellows, without having the doors of opportunity closed roughly in his face. I just want to mention how that stood out to me, because I believe that today a lot of people don't have much opportunity, and it's still going on. And basically this quote has been going on for so long, decades, and it's still an issue that we have today.
Yeah. I would even say centuries, right? Because keep in mind, this was written in 1903, right? We're in 2021. Yeah, very good points.
To me, something that stood out was on page 12, where the author writes, "Here at last seemed to have been discovered the mountain path to Canaan, longer than the highway of emancipation and law, steep and rugged, but straight, leading to heights high enough to overlook life." Here the author makes a reference to the land of Canaan, which is a biblical promised land that was promised to the Israelites by God at the end of their struggles. This promised land reference to me makes me believe that the author was sort of referring that one day in the long run, there will finally be actual true liberty and access to the pursuit of happiness for all African Americans.
Yeah, and kind of to provide further context. So if we go up more before what you read, right? And I'm gonna start where it says, it was the ideal. It was the ideal of book learning, the curiosity born of compulsory ignorance, to know and test the power of the Kabbalistic letter have been discovered. I'm sorry, for the Kabbalistic letters of the white man, the longing to know. here at last seem to have been discovered, the mountain to the path of Canaan. So what he's saying is education at that point, right? They view that as that path to the land of Canaan, right? So he's saying at this point of the essay, they were viewing education as the means to afford emancipation. But to kind of go back to a point that Cecilia made, and it's also on page 12, he says, this is towards the bottom of the page. He says, he began to have a dim feeling that to attain his place in the world, he must be himself and not another, okay? So this is his response to the dual consciousness. There's another piece that Cecilia read where he says, two warring ideals. So the two warring ideals are the two separate worlds, right? Two warring ideals that if it wasn't for the Black woman, Black man's dogged strength alone, it would tear him asunder, right? So the white world and the Black world within one body are warring with each other, right? And he's saying, because of the strength of the Black man and the Black woman, that's the only thing that's preventing this war at play within him to not tear him up, right? Just his strength alone is allowing him to keep his composure and keep him together. But he realized to make your place in the world, you have to fully show up as a Black individual, right? If you're succumbing to the other world on the other side of that veil, and you're trying to show up in the way that they view you, no one will ever see you as yourself, right? You're always going to be looked through the prism, through the gaze of the other. So what DuBois is advocating for is to show up as your authentic self, right? So this notion of code switching, this is what he's talking about. Code switching is a byproduct of the double consciousness, right? So when you don't feel comfortable or you feel ashamed to speak Spanish because you're in a predominantly white environment, DuBois is advocating for us to show up your full authentic self, right? Your culture is just as equally important and relevant as any other culture on the planet, right? A cultural co-worker is what he's advocating for, right? So because you have an accent, because you may speak a different dialect, because you speak a different language, there's nothing to be ashamed of, right? Cultural co-worker, right? To show up yourself, right? So it shouldn't be, do I present as an Asian or do I present as an Asian American, right? That's not the play. The play is, do I show up my full self, right? And you make them adjust. And this is what DuBois is getting at. This is our spiritual striving, right? Brilliant. Any last comments or last concerns? Cecilia, I agree with you. DuBois, he's, as far as how to approach intellectual work, there's really no one better to model yourself after. Let's just get one comment from somebody we haven't heard from, and we'll call it a day.
I feel like you guys unpacked the reading for me, because I kind of interpreted it a little bit differently.
What did you gather, Francisco?
Well, what I understood of it was like on page 9, yeah, he states like the particular sensation of the double consciousness. I understand what you guys are talking about, but to me, it just feels like that he's aware that he's different, and all he gets from people are dirty looks. And even though like the emancipation happened, despite being an American now, in their eyes, being dark-skinned means that you will always be dark-skinned no matter what. And to me, the writer is just trying to portray that racism will always be there no matter what. And that's how I interpreted this reading.
Yeah, and Francisco, I don't think that your interpretation differs from anyone else's interpretation. I agree with you, and I think everyone would agree with you. I just think we're also looking at other elements that he articulated, the very same thing that you mentioned, right? So that's the beautiful thing about text like this, because it's so dense, it leads for a multiplicity of interpretations. And oftentimes it's not but, it's and, right? So it's what Cecilia's saying and what you're saying. You know what I'm saying? It's not what Cecilia's saying, but not what you're saying. It's both, right? And that, to me, that's really where the beauty lies. Okay, let me show you guys the next week's reading, and then I'll try to show you roughly when our midterm should be. 1 second. Now, I apologize for going over time, y'all. Got a little carried away. It's a lot to unpack in this reading. Okay. So for next week's reading,
Professor, our
Yeah.
midterm was just the journals, correct?
no, you're gonna have an actual midterm. It'll be about I'll give you 5 questions. You only have to answer 3 of the 5 questions.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So for next week, we're reading Amy Césaire's Discourse on Colonialism. And you'll see Césaire is taking up the same problem as DuBois, except Césaire is from the Caribbean. So it's not racism, it's colonialism. But you'll see a lot of the arguments are going to be the same. So be attentive to that. So Discourse on Colonialism, these 2 PDFs are one reading. So read both, please. Let me pull up the syllabus and we'll see roughly when to start thinking about our midterm. And keep in mind, you'll have a midterm review before the actual midterm date. So I won't drop it on you without preparing you. So we're here currently. So we'll finish this readings. We'll go, we just did DuBois. I inverted this, so we'll do Césaire, then we'll do Garvey. Then we go into the Black Power section. During this section will be our midterm. So what we'll do is we'll have class. I believe after this is spring break. We'll come back from spring break, do our midterm review, and then that following week will be the midterm. Does that make sense? And then keep in mind, you guys, you will have plenty of time to prepare. We'll go through a whole day of just going through what will be on the midterm, so you guys will know exactly what to anticipate. The way I look at it, I'm not here to make it harder for you guys. I want to set you up for success, not failure.
You said that the midterm thing is like 5 questions, right? And is it like multiple choice, or is it going to be like an essay type of thing?
Yeah,
Oh.
essay.
How
So
long would they be? How long should they be?
It's really up to you. So how it will be set up, right? You'll have 5 questions. I'm just asking you to answer 3. So you'll choose 3, but be attentive, like read the question carefully. So it may read like, how old are African people? Name a significant individual prior to European contact. What does this information do about how you view African people? So there's like 3 questions within that one, right? So be attentive to all of those components of the question. Man, I'm just asking for you to answer 3 of the 5 ones that I presented. So again, there'll be 5 questions, but in one of the questions, there may be 3 sub-questions within it. So read it carefully and make sure that you address all of the questions. Another thing that I'll be looking for is a theoretical framework, right? So we know we talked about African-American male theory as a theoretical framework. We'll go over this again for the midterm review, but that's something I'm going to look for you guys to use to answer your questions, right? So for example, according to African-American male theory, using African-American male theory as a theoretical framework, African people could be traced back 8 million years old, right? A significant individual prior to European contact would be Mansa Musa, because he was the richest man on the planet till this day. This information becomes important because it changes the way that we perceive the history of African people going beyond enslavement, right? So that's me using a theoretical framework and answering each of those 3 components of one question, right? So that to me would be an A response. You use the theoretical framework and you touched on each point within that question. So that's what I'll be looking for. Don't stress about it too much now. We'll take some time as it gets closer to really go slow. Break down how I'm looking for you guys to answer the questions and things of that nature. So don't stress, you'll be prepared, but that's around the time that we'll be engaging the midterms. Any other questions?
Professor frozen for anybody else?
Yeah.
Say one more time,
Oh, he's
Dan?
back.
Okay, yeah, I think he's back.
Oh, it's frozen. Shit, I'm talking.
You froze for like
You
a good
froze
second.
for a while.
All right, my bad. I was talking hella shit too. I was just telling y'all all kind of information about the midterm. I gave y'all midterm answers, bro. I gave y'all kind of, anyway. So this is I think where I left off. So it'll be like 3 questions within one question, right? I'm also looking for you guys to use a theoretical framework, right? So one of the that I gave was African American male theory. So work through that theory to answer your question. But don't stress on the midterms too much. We'll have some time to really unpack it. We'll go slow and give you guys ample information to allow you to be successful for the midterm. Are there any other questions you guys have for me? No?